Good morning and welcome to Focus on the News. I'm Dick Black, joined today by John Tigas. John, good to have you with us.
Yeah, always good to be here, Dick, and much to be thankful for as we get ready to head into the one of my favorite holidays of the year. Certainly the only one that doesn't seem like it amps up. It seems like it's the one time that you get to slow down a little.
So, yeah, isn't that true? That's very nice. We've got about 20 people coming over for Thanksgiving dinner, and fortunately Barbara does all the work. Sometimes I pitch in, but she's tremendous at that. So
yeah, it's a great one. And as things slow down, we're seeing that things are slowing down at the South Pole as well. Interesting news coming out that we actually have new records for not heat and melting, but cold at the South Pole. November 16th, 17th, and 18th, plunging to negative 45.2 centigrade, compared with 44 centigrade, same day in 1987. And it's a 6-month winter, was the coldest since records began in 1957. In addition to that, we see more and more ice gathering in Greenland. So on both sides of the poles, in spite of prognosticators telling us that the world is ending and we're all going to be swimming our way through New York City, it's not looking that way right now. What do you make of that, sir?
I remember I think it was a professor from Princeton who said, we've sort of talked all this global warming stuff to death, and now we need to just make the opponents shut up and stop talking, and we should prosecute them under the law for crimes against humanity, which has a death penalty. So so he seems to have a little difficulty holding an intellectual argument without becoming terribly frustrated. But anyway, it's interesting. Man did not reach the South Pole until, at least the center of the South Pole, till 1911. So it's not been all that long. I mean, it's a terribly harsh environment. And so what's going on? Last year, where they were able to measure the average temperature for the entire winter. They have a 6-month winter in the South Pole, and then I guess the temperature rises to just I don't know. I'm sure it never gets very high. It was the coldest winter since 1957 when they first began recording the temperatures up there. So you're talking, this is a long time, 1957. That doesn't mean that we're experiencing the coldest winters since 1957. It just means that we don't have any records that go any earlier than 1957 in the South Pole. But during this lengthy period, last year was the coldest winter at the South Pole ever recorded. Now, this year it's continuing, and just several days ago, we're talking about November 16th, 17th, 18th, they had record cold temperatures. And so they're setting records again on top of what they had last time. So it's phenomenally cold. And then additionally, now, one of the big things, everybody remembers that the global warmists have been saying, the Arctic sea ice is melting, the world's going to end, we're all going to be flooded out. And it turns out that the Arctic sea ice has grown 27% in just the last 10 years. I mean, now it had reached sort of a low point. I don't know how long they'd been measuring the ice, but it had reached a low point and then it sprang back 27%. That is a vast expanse of ice in just a 10-year period.
Yeah, it is crazy. And, time and again, it seems that these guys have got it wrong. If you go back to articles going back to the 70s and 80s, it's always 10 years from now or at the new century, it's all over. And, we're in the wedding business, so people pay a lot of attention to weather when it's coming up on their wedding day and it's going to be outside. So I've been watching that carefully for a dozen years. And it always amazes me. People started looking 30 days out and it always says 50% chance of rain. And the reason is they don't know. They don't know 30 days out. And in most cases, even 3 days until you get within about 24 hours, weather patterns are pretty complicated. And so to think that somehow we can look 30 years out or even 3 years out and figure out what things are doing, when clearly climate change is the only truth that can really be said, is that climate does change. It gets colder, it gets hotter. There's been ice ages, there's been warming periods. We see evidence of all those things. So to think that it's not going to be cyclical and continue to change, and to think that man somehow by throwing up a few solar panels or windmills is going to make a radical change to that, it just seems ridiculous. It just doesn't pass the common sense test. Now, should we be polluting and dumping everything nasty in the air? Of course not. But there just hasn't been any common sense behind this. And certainly when you follow the money trail, it appears that it's a lot more about who's benefiting, at the cash register, more so than who's benefiting in terms of what's going on with seas rising or not.
Absolutely. Well, people who really love the outdoors, they get kind of whipped up about all this stuff because they don't want to see nature destroyed. But it's interesting, the people who were always talking about climate catastrophe, one of the big things that they talked about was the Great Barrier Reef, which is this magnificent coral that grows off the coast of Australia, and there was worry back some years ago that maybe the reef would disappear. I mean, that's what the climate alarmists were saying is, oh, global warming is destroying the Great Barrier Reef. Well, it turns out, and this is according to Reuters news service, that parts of Australia's Great Barrier Reef are showing the highest coral cover in 36 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
It goes back to 1986. And it's just, it's expanding like crazy. And then there was another one that, another one of these biological things where you had this fellow, Sir David Attenborough, and he was making this series of 6 frozen planet green propaganda films, and he was talking about the demise of the Adelaide penguins in Antarctica, and he looked at this one colony, and it had over 40 years had gone from 20,000 mating pairs down to 400. Well, that nobody likes the poor penguins to disappear. Well, so this got a lot of play. Oh, the penguins are disappearing. And now they just recently discovered 1.5 million Adelaide's penguins on the other side of the continent. So they've discovered this 76 times more penguins were discovered than all of those believed lost in the last 40 years. So now there are too many penguins. The penguins are all over the place. The penguins are probably destroying the planet now.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, this has been going on since really the 60s with the environmental movement at that time. You were a young man then and serving in the military. Um, this is is it a continuation of what the environmental movement started then? Or has it been completely politicized, or has it been taken over by a bunch of con artists that figured out this is a great way to make money?
You know, you go back, I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I suspect in the 20s and 30s you had it where you had the conservation movement and you had
Yeah.
the establishment of the the great national parks
Right.
that serve America, and really a wonderful thing. I was a utility boy in a factory in Massachusetts, and it had been an old Sutter's Mill, which were famous back when I was a kid. You know, they were big industrial plants. And I would go to drink water because I did physical labor. I was a human mule. And so I needed water. But I hated to go to the water fountain because, you know, I was very much an expert in chemistry. And I noticed that where the water poured, there was a rather bright blue stain indicating there was a heavy amount of copper in that water. And I knew that's not a good thing to be drinking a lot of copper. So I was always sort of balancing between, you know, how much water do I want to drink? I got to stay alive, but I don't want to take in all this copper. So you know, at first it did a lot of good, but you reach a certain point where you say, okay, we've gotten 95% of it done.
Right.
And then you go to the extremes. And when they came up with this global warming hypothesis, it just became far more ideological than scientific. And it was all based on computer models. And everybody knows garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
You can program a computer to tell you that the moon is gradually going to lose its momentum and fall more into the Earth's gravitational field, and it will plunge into the Earth and break it into several parts. You can program a computer to say that and to establish it. And if you begin to believe what you put into a computer, then you know you've just lost your mind. It's crazy.
Right. And the number of variables that go into weather is, I mean, it's actually really fascinating, but there's a reason why, you know, people get advanced degrees in meteorology. But at the same time, you're right. The only way that they can even fathom how all these things contribute to one another is they have to make assumptions. And as we just got done saying, there's trends where things go up, there's things that go down. You can't actually point a straight line on practically any weather pattern. And yet that's what's happened. And people, you know, some people have used it, you know, for their own gain. I mean, certainly we've seen it lead to really tragic results. Right now, you know, it's kind of gone out of the news because of some of the other crazy going on. But Northern Europe's going to have a really, really rough winter because they went all in on green. And now they don't, and, you know, the Russians are reducing their amount of fossil gas fuels and other things. And I mean, it's tragic. People may freeze to death because of this ideology. And I mean, it really almost feels like a religion at this point.
It is. It's you know, I think it's inherent in the nature of mankind to seek out God. Mm-hmm. And we have an intellectual class that is taught that God's an anathema, that the idea of God is for lower classes, and that if you're upper class, you've got to deny the existence of God. But the problem is that the mind is programmed to seek God, and if if you're prohibited from seeking God in reality, and what I consider reality, I mean, I understand people who deny God, but if you are prohibited from this, then you're forced to seek some kind of a spiritual force.
Yeah.
And I think the spiritual force for many people on the left is Mother Earth. You know, the people have worshiped the earth over, you know, many, many centuries, probably going back to almost the beginning of mankind. And so it is easy to say, well, let's call it environmentalism, but it's really a sort of earth worship. And anyway, at this point, I see no compelling evidence that the temperature. Oh, and you know, we didn't even touch on the fact, but let me do this before we move on. According to climate.gov, okay, a government agency putting this out, global temperatures on the Earth stopped rising 10 years ago. And they put out this article that says, why did Earth's surface temperature stop rising in the past decade when the Earth God told us that the temperatures were going to rise? And so the temperatures aren't going up. At this point, after decades and decades of incredibly intense study, I see no compelling evidence, no scientific evidence to support the notion that temperatures are rising, that the seas are rising, or that the ice is melting. I don't see any evidence. This global warming is the greatest superstitious hoax in human history.
Yeah, it's sad so many people have bought into it. And, you know, certainly, I want to say again, I mean, there's been some great things that have come out of the conservation movement, environmentalism, but it's done in the context of preserving something beautiful and taking care of one another with clean water and clean air and whatever else. But when it becomes a religion, I mean, it really becomes something that zealots go so over the board that they hurt people. And when we start hurting people, when people can't even, you know, stay warm because of it, it's a problem. And so we gotta get past it. And, you know, one of the other things that we seem to not be able to get past is racism. You know, we forget that throughout history, racism has been a problem and it hasn't gone away. Anyone that spent any time in Hawaii or knows people that knows that if you're a haole and you're in Hawaii, you are a minority and you're not well liked in a lot of places. My college roommate was from Hawaii and he was a white guy and he used to talk a lot about being a minority and not well liked. This was back in the 80s and apparently it hasn't changed. There was just a big attack. I guess it didn't. Goes back a few years, but they just end up having the trial on it. And a gentleman who moved to a remote part of Maui ended up getting attacked with shovels and other things, and being told the whole reason he's being attacked was he's white. So what do you make of Hawaiian haole attacks?
Yeah, this is one incident that really tells you a whole lot. Now, you might not know because the media doesn't talk about this, but Hawaii is so notorious for anti-white racism that anybody who spends any time there knows this is not a new phenomenon. This goes back forever. And so you had this incident where a white man purchased a house in this Hawaiian area, and his wife was very excited about it, and he moved there so that he could kind of fix up this dilapidated house, and then he had a mob of Hawaiians, and I've watched the video myself. It's very revealing, and and a bunch of these big husky Hawaiians came storming in onto his property, burst into his home, and the man was trying to do anything to settle them down. At one point, he says, "Look, how about having a beer and relaxing a little bit?" But they come in and they're saying, this isn't personal. It says you just have the wrong effing color skin, and they made it quite clear that he was not moving into that neighborhood because he's white, and the whole thing was on video. You hear them on video talking about, you just have the wrong effing skin color, and they go in, and I mean, this guy is, an ordinary size built guy, and he's surrounded by these great big husky guys and women too. They all swarm in, and one of them brings a shovel and begins to bash him on the head with it. They do it once. They throw all of his belongings out of the house, just destroy them all. And then finally, he's trying to escape. He's getting in his car to get out of there. And they attack him with the shovel again. They beat him. They kick him. They break his ribs. And, I mean, he's suffered, very severe injuries. And they're just having fun. They've got some white guy. They're going to just beat the hell out of him.
And they caught this on video because he had like a home surveillance camera. Or?
He did, yes. He had home surveillance. I think they had harassed him before, and he felt threatened. He was threatened, obviously. Victim was Christopher Kunzelman, and now there's more to it than just the racism, because this occurs in 2014. Okay, so it's taken 9 years to get a prosecution. And here's the thing: you had a very simple case. You've got video evidence. You've got the victim's witness evidence that corroborates it. You can clearly identify the individuals who are committing these crimes. It's a simple case. It's not complicated facts or anything. You have a clearly established hate crime. It's done because of his race. It's not done because of some dispute. And yet it takes 9 years. Why? I think because the guy's white and the others are not. I think that's the state of Hawaii decided not to bring hate crime charges. Now, if it'd been the other way, see, I don't believe in these hate crime laws at all, because they really are a way that you enhance the penalty for one race and not the other. Whereas you ought to be looking at what happened, regardless if a victim is white, black, Hispanic, whatever you have.
Yeah. How about this crime?
Just look at the crime.
Yeah.
Look at the crime.
Someone came into your house and beat the snot out of you. Seems like it might be a problem. I don't care what race you are. But it took 7 years before they even prosecuted this, apparently.
Yes, and the Department of Justice, our wonderful DOJ, always there to defend the people. It took them 6 years to even decide to open a case. And so it's really very disturbing in what it tells us about the lack of justice in America, and I think what you have at this point, we've got a point where particularly whites have been so demonized by this critical race theory and so forth that they're really widely subjected to racial violence in many locations, and this is one that's where it's just sort of very simple, clearly highlighted. But I think if we as a nation continue promoting this critical race theory, which really it's a Marxist theory that fosters a class division and a violent uprising of one class against the other, in this case, a racial class against another. It's just our culture, our civilization cannot exist over the long run when we literally take in our public schools and we teach school children that, little Mary over there is a privileged oppressor and you are oppressed and you have a right to bully little Mary and she deserves whatever she gets. You just cannot have a civilization function on that basis. And yet we're educating generations of youngsters to adopt that point of view.
Yeah, it's really sad, the amount of division that is being created simply because people are making a big deal about this. And in this case, I don't, outside of you, I never heard of this case. This is against white guys. And you know what? In some ways, I'm glad I didn't, but it does kind of beg the question, why is it that one race can be brutalized and another one can't? It's the same thing with Asians right now. There was a Black woman in Seattle that went after this one Asian woman, just said terrible, nasty things. She got it on film. So we see certain races that can be discriminated against and certain ones that get treated differently. We see the same thing sexually, where even though it's just a single digit, 2 or 3% of the population is homosexual, we've got everybody and their brother with rainbow flags acting like they have to be proud of something. And, if we can't get to the point that we can accept one another, for who they are, as long as they're not doing something destructive to someone else, we're living in a country that is not going to be healthy. And it certainly, we see everywhere is the decay all around us that's being caused by these type of policies and programs and educational ideologies that are dividing people and wreaking destruction, not just between races, but between families. I mean, look what COVID did, just a health policy. Look what it did to families. So it seems to be a very deliberate effort to reap division and economic destruction on our country and certainly the whole globe. And, one person that recognizes that happens to be Hawaiian herself and the right color of skin, I think, if she was in Hawaii, because she got elected as a moderate Democrat to Congress. It was about 10 years ago now, wasn't it? And she was hailed as a hero, and everybody thought she was the next great coming of the Democratic Party. Well, not only did she denounce that she was leaving the Democratic Party and denounce the Democratic Party as racist and getting ready to cause World War III, but now she just got hired on at Fox News. That's a pretty big swing. What do you make of it, sir?
They're going to hate that. I have a tremendous admiration for Tulsi Gabbard. And I'm not saying that she and I would agree on everything, but she opposes the war in Syria, which I very strongly oppose. The U.S. found itself fighting on the side of Al-Qaeda, same people that flew the jets into the Twin Towers on 9/11. And so she opposes that. She understands it intimately. And she also opposes the war in Ukraine, as do I. She campaigned for president on the Democratic ticket, and she ran as an opponent of U.S. military interventionism. And
It used to be a classic Democratic position.
Well, they got a lot of credit for that because they turned against the war in Vietnam.
Right.
But that was a little self-serving because John Kennedy decided we must go to war in Vietnam. He put the first troops in. It was done quietly, surreptitiously, but literally they were fighting in Vietnam. Americans were dying. Lyndon Johnson put it on speed, and the next thing, we're all ramped up and going off to war. And it was Nixon who was elected to put an end to the war. Yeah. Now, same thing happened in Korea. It was Truman who went to war in Korea, and it was Eisenhower who was elected to pull us out. And if you go back, the First World War, Democrat. Second World War, Democrat. Korean War, Democrat. Vietnam War, Democrat. Ukrainian War, Democrat. Now, the only exception that I can find, I'm sure maybe there's others, but the war in the Middle East was a concoction of George Bush, Daddy Bush, and the Cheney clan. So you had these.
They had R's behind their behind their names, but they sure look like they're buddies with the Obama and Clinton now. So who knows? It seems like a big cabal. But the Spanish-American War certainly was something that a Republican, in the case of Teddy Roosevelt, was behind.
Yeah,
excuse me, he didn't lead that. He went up the hill at. But I believe the president at the time, was it Cleveland? Anyway,
I'm not sure.
I won't go there. Maybe I'll look it up real quick now that I've realized I mistook the attack on San Juan Hill with him leading our country. Two different things. But in any case, Tulsi is now with Fox. A lot of folks, me included, honestly, it's you kind of shake your head because she was recognized by Klaus Schwab as one of the up and coming leaders by the World Economic Forum, and a lot of those folks like Trudeau and others are not nice people, not people you'd want leading your country. And other folks have said she's just positioning herself to maybe get on the ticket with Trump in 2024 or maybe a DeSantis. So. A lot of questions. I've seen some pretty interesting pieces written around. Is she controlled opposition? Because it almost seems like too good to be true, and yet exceptionally well spoken, very, very moderate, very certainly appeals to, I think, people who are tired of all the crazy on both sides. What do you see in her future besides Fox News gig?
Well, she has a political future, and I think she's staking that out. I could see her somewhere at a very high level in a Trump or DeSantis administration, somewhere doing foreign policy. Oh, if she were doing foreign policy, I mean, I'll tell you, I wrote a letter to every member of Congress, every congressman, every senator, laying out in fairly simple terms the facts as they were on the ground in Syria. As we were flooding weapons into Al Qaeda, we were making sure that they were channeled to ISIS. And anyway, I got some responses from a number of congressmen, senators. Most of them were just fluff garbage, but I got this one from Tulsi Gabbard's office, and it was stunning. She displayed an intimate understanding of the reality on the ground in Syria, and I was in Syria on a couple of occasions, literally convoying through ISIS-controlled territory with jet aircraft loaded with bombs on either flank, with attack helicopters flying overhead security, and with a small company of elite special operators from the Syrian army. And we were going through ISIS territory. These people were supplied by the United States. Now, ISIS didn't get the supplies directly. They were channeled. Sometimes they come from Saudi Arabia or some allied nation. But ISIS, or rather Al-Qaeda, all of the Al-Qaeda affiliates were being supplied by the U.S. out of warehouses that were operated by the CIA just over the Turkish border. And so I knew exactly what was going on the ground. I'd met with President Bashar al-Assad a couple of times, and with his wife on one occasion. And but here was this woman from Hawaii, and it was stunning. I thought the most informed person in the U.S. Congress appears to be a woman from the most liberal state in the world, Hawaii, and she's a Democrat. She's not a Republican, and yet she knows what the others don't know. And I got to tell you, I was enormously impressed by that. And I'm seeing similar insight into Ukraine and how that war could have easily been avoided if we had just neutralized Ukraine. I mean, not do something bad to them, but make them neutral and independent of this Cold War mentality, and make it very clear that they would never join NATO. They would never join any military alliance. They would just, they could have retained their original borders. They could have avoided all this slaughter of people and destruction of property. But it was the U.S. and the United Kingdom that just pushed them and said, no, you're not going to make peace. So I think she could, just imagine if we stopped making war, our economy would explode. I mean, it would just, everybody's income in this country would go up probably by 10, 20% in a short period of time if we weren't throwing away money. We're just doing another 37 billion on top of 40 billion. Just blank checks. If Ukraine, Zelensky, here's this lifelong comedian who struts around in ladies' sparkling red high heel shoes, doing all kinds of alternative types of things, and all of a sudden, the mass media says, "Okay, wait a minute, let's change it over." And he puts on a green T-shirt. Now all of a sudden he's a military hero.
Yeah, a military hero who cancels the other political parties and shuts down free speech. And last week tried to start World War III with a launch of Ukrainian missiles into Poland, blaming. The more I see of this guy, the more it's just like, I'm like, talk about controlled opposition. Ukraine was corrupt before he became president there, but my God, it hasn't gotten any better underneath him. I can't believe we're supporting him and his government. I feel terrible for the Ukrainian people. I really do. But I also feel terrible for, people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're not doing jack diddly for them. So, if we really care about being the world's policeman, there's some better people to support, at least the leaders of those countries.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's hope that comes to an end. And yeah, it would be great to have someone like Tulsi Gabbard actually provide some rational policies in our foreign policy, because right now we're lucky we're not doing World War III already. But on a positive note, tomorrow we have much to be thankful for. And should we end on a thankful note? What are you thankful for going into the holiday?
Yes, well, I think John will join me in this. I'm very thankful to our Savior Jesus Christ and
Amen.
God Almighty for allowing us to be in peace at this moment, to avoiding the triggering of World War III, which we came quite close to just a week ago. And And we do pray for the people of Ukraine and of Russia, that that peace will come and that they can rebuild their lives. And but we have lots to be thankful for. We have really been blessed here. We don't always deserve it, but we certainly are thankful. And so for all of us here at Focus on the News, happy Thanksgiving. Have a good time, and we will see you for our next show.